big thanks to all of our speakers, and I'll open the floor to questions. So questions from all of you in this room. Also, we have other attendees who are in our overflow room, and we have a virtual audience as well. So we'll kind of rotate around the three groups. Yes, so I'll ask please the speakers to come to the table. And then I'll start taking questions in rounds of 3, and I immediately saw 2 over there, so I'll go 1, 2, and then 3. Go ahead. John. Thank you. And oh, please, if you could identify yourself, and if you have a specific question for a specific speaker.
Thank you. I'm John Coonrod with the Hunger Project, and my question is for Schengen. So both Asma and Jada talked about the importance of gender and the empowerment of women, gender equality. And IFPRI's done really great work over the past several years in getting us better data on the impact of gender inequality. And I was wondering in this report, what were the key gender lessons that were highlighted in the case studies in the report?
I'm Dan Norell with World Vision, based here in Washington, D.C. My question, certainly for Jada, but other panelists may want to speak to this, is what about the half-hectare farmers? Not smallholder, but micro-smallholder. What should the international agenda be for increasing yields, improving nutrition for the most vulnerable, smallest farmers?
Mic over on this side.
Bruce Brower, Chemonics International. My question is mainly for Mr. Karas from Brookings Institution. You mentioned that we do not see this convergence in agriculture that we see in manufacturing and services. If we don't understand why we're not seeing that convergence, then we're not going to be able to effectively address policies and projects and so forth, interventions to change it. Do you have some thoughts on why we don't see convergence in agriculture?
I think that's a question for Schengen.
Okay, so we'll stop there with that round of 3 and let our speakers go. Perhaps we'll start with Schengen. John's question to you on key gender lessons.
Okay, yes. For 2012 report, we had a chapter on gender. The key lessons we learned is, again, focusing on gender is not just an equity issue. It's not just a rights issue. It's an efficiency issue as well. The women now have lower income, lower productivity is because they have less access to productive assets, land, water, education, and beyond, many things, like land issues, particularly land issues. So actually I was in Rome last Friday. The Rome Agency celebrated International Women's Day. I was honored to sit with a panel of women, so I almost became like an honorable woman there, to speak about how women can play a very critical role in agriculture, in food, and in nutrition security. So I would suggest that you look at our report in 2012. So there's a strong chapter co-authored by Ruth Munstick and Agnes Quensenbein, the 2 leaders from IFPRI. On the why, let's say, the industry of productivity has converged, right, but not agriculture. Well, part of the reason is the nature of agriculture. So you cannot move the land around, you cannot move the water around, and obviously you also cannot move the people around, at least right now. So you have some restrictions. And in many countries, agricultural sector, rural area, is still like a reservoir. It's a place where you cannot go anywhere else. So that's why there is a difference there. But that difference does not mean we cannot do anything about it. So our job, particularly the government policies, needs to correct that sort of failure. Why there is a difference between rural and urban areas, between agriculture and non-agriculture sectors. In a purely economic sense, the labor capital should be moved around until when the marginal productivity is equal among different places. So it's a constraint, bottlenecks that we have to work to lift.
Did you want to add anything to that? Or?
I think in the high-level panel discussions, one of the concepts that was very powerful was the concept of connectedness, and the idea that if we are really going to end hunger, end extreme poverty, that one of the key mechanisms is actually to connect people to to the economy as a whole. And there was a sense that there are still many, many people who are isolated, either geographically or in terms of facing a range of discriminations, whether it's caste, gender, income level, or other kinds. So I would just suggest that notion of people who are disconnected is probably more prevalent in rural areas than other places. And so it operates in agriculture to a greater extent. And then I would just add to that the fact that agriculture is so highly political compared to many other sectors of the economy. It's clearly a sector which has tremendous amounts of government intervention, whether it's in price setting or other kinds of intervention, and probably one of the sectors where trade is most regulated, and not always regulated, I would say, in the most efficient way. And there are some experts on agricultural trade sitting in the audience who could add to that. But obviously, these kinds of the political economics of agriculture are quite different from the political economics of, say, manufacturing, where now there's very little politics in favor of discrimination between one industry versus another.
Ed, I believe there's a question for you on micro smallholders.
Yes, there was. So the question was about half-hectare farmers, and what about the smallest and most vulnerable? As I said, we actually focused on extreme poverty. That very much includes, as a major target, that smallest of smallholders and even landless people that work in agriculture and don't have access to those things. Although sustainable intensification will likely not end up being a target goal, I think the principles of that are something that we want to see if we can get there. We still want to work with those populations to increase their yields, to provide them access to the financing or technologies that they need, to encourage them to use those to grow plots, to grow things that could be nutritious as well as profitable. Another key thing that we very strongly want to focus on, which will help that population, as well as jobs, right? Providing other income earning opportunities in those communities so that people can then make choices about their sources of food and have the ability to buy that food at affordable rates. Finally, I think the focus on markets helps to get there, because you want to make food accessible and affordable, whether people grow it themselves or that person on a half hectare of food is still a net buyer of food. So how do we have that woman be able to still buy and access a diverse array of foods for her family beyond what she may be growing on that land? But jobs, markets, and equal access to inputs and technologies is a big part of the solution.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to the next round. Simone, do we have anything? So next round, if there are questions, Alan.
Alan Jury, World Food Program USA. This is primarily to Schengen, but perhaps Jada can answer one element of it as well. Schengen, you pointed out that one of the challenges, as you saw it, was integrating or coordinating this sort of, if you will, the different pillars of the social protection safety nets, the nutrition agenda, and the sustainable agriculture agenda, pulling them together. There's a lot going on in each area. I think, as the report correctly notes, a lot has been made in getting the nutrition connected, but this year. But the social protection safety net still seems to be sort of an outlier when people talk food security, despite the fact, as your own chart said, in some of the success stories, Thailand and Brazil, for example, it's a critical element in both reduction of stunting and reduction in undernutrition. How do you see this? What are the opportunities to better tie this in? And Jada, if you had a chance to talk specifically about how you see social protection safety nets fit into the U.S. strategy, because Feed the Future really has a strong emphasis on the nutrition and ag productivity, but the safety net maybe hasn't been as articulated as clearly, and I'd welcome your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Other questions? Sarah?
Hello, Haben Berhe from Feed the Future Partnering for Innovation. My question is about technologies. I've seen that ICT has been mentioned in this report, but are there other technologies that the report has explored that have direct or indirect effect on nutrition? Thank you.
Others for this round? We have one in the back, Rajul.
Rajul Pandya-Loch from IFPRI. I have a question for Homi. In this post-2015 discourse, how much engagement, involvement, ownership is there by developing countries, particularly the larger ones? At the end of the day, the impact we will see will be there in terms of reducing poverty, hunger, and so forth. How actively involved are they? Do they feel engaged? And do you feel that they will feel accountable at the end of the day? And if not, how do we find effective ways to involve them or change the process? Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll start off with those, and maybe, Homi, you want to take that last question first, and we'll work our way backwards.
So obviously on the high-level panel, developing countries were very broadly represented. Two of the three co-chairs, one was President Yudhoyono from Indonesia, the other was President Johnson Sirleaf from Liberia. But I think that developing countries is just too broad a category. So there are some countries that are very seriously engaged in this, and some countries less so, and that's true across the spectrum of, developed or developing. I think that it's. I think what's central to countries embracing this agenda is their sense of whether global cooperation will actually help, or whether global cooperation will end up constraining their policy space. And that varies a little country to country, but certainly if all countries undertake certain responsibilities, I think it makes it easier for all countries to embrace the agenda. So at the end of the day, I think it's going to be very much of a package deal. There has to be something for all countries in this deal. One of the things that we had with the MDGs was a commitment to raise ODA resources, which many people have described as the glue that kind of held the MDGs together. That made the MDGs very much into a advanced country, low-income country kind of partnership. And one of the big questions was, well, what do middle-income countries get out of this? That is re-emerging in this post-2015 discussion. I think there's a recognition that ODA will not, large increases in ODA will not be the glue this time round. So then what will be? And I think the answer to that is this notion of far broader partnerships, and broader partnerships with, in particular, South-South cooperation, with the private sector and everything that the commercial business sector has to offer, and with civil society.
Thank you. There's a question from Alan on integrating, coordinating the different pillars, especially social protection. Shengen?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. But when we should use social protection as an instrument really depends on the context and the timing of the development. The countries like China, Vietnam had a pretty sort of equal distribution of assets, income, until probably 30 years ago. So the social protection to target certain groups probably didn't make much sense. So the broader-based development made sense. However, after 20 or 30 years development, lots of people have moved out of poverty, but many remained, and the inequality has increased in the societies. So the social protection becomes very important. Unfortunately, these countries have not paid enough attention to that. They still use growth as an instrument. So my belief is in this country they needed to invest more in social protection and target that social protection very well. So do not, let's say, crowd out more productive investment. For Africa, Africa is very different. Africa today, they need, particularly some of the poorest poor, need a social protection. But more importantly is to link that social protection to productivity enhancement, to growth, to nutrition. So productive social safety net, probably you hinted at that, I should mention the productive social safety net that many international agencies like WFP, the World Bank, and IFPRI have worked. So linking social protection to productive enhancement is a way to go for many African countries. Now, should I also have my own view on smallholders and so-called half-hectare micro farms? 30 years ago, 35 years ago, I was in a rural town in China. My whole family had 0.5 hectare, maybe even less. That was given by the connectives after the decentralization. So we got that piece of land. So what we did is to increase production productivity. Yes, better technology, better seeds, better access to market. We had an incentive to work harder. So we could do it. However, when the urban sector began to develop, non-farm economy began to emerge, we move out. So I would call it either this smallholder either have to move up or move out. Move up, you know, to increase the value of production or even increase the size. So now I have 3 brothers. 2 moved out. I moved to US. Another brother moved to another big city as the CEO of a small company. Moving out actually created opportunity for my brother left behind to move up. So, right? So 0.5 hectare of the land. In the meantime, he also rented a piece of land from others. So if you don't move up, if you don't move out, I'm afraid you will move down.
The one aspect of that, Alan kind of pointed towards me to talk about the U.S. strategy on safety nets, and you're right. I think since the initiative, since Feed the Future started, we have been evolving to communicate better how that incorporates safety nets, but also to do that in action. So, I think the legacy of where the funding was, you had very strong Food for Peace and Dacha brands, and so Feed the Future really plugged gaps that were there in other places. And so it seems separate, but I think we are more integrated and working together more than what's on paper. And I think the onus is on us to articulate that. Increasingly, as we're working on food aid, that was a very common messaging, and increasingly you will hear us talking more about food writ large, which will encompass things that people see as traditional Feed the Future, as well as things that people see as traditional Food for Peace. Our work in resilience really has been the leading point of more effective and stronger collaboration amongst the different cones. We have a secretariat internally that is DACHA, it's Bureau for Food Security, and it's our Africa Bureau, because that's been the focus, the focal geography for a lot of our resilience efforts. Very strongly, equally represented. In Feed the Future, we've also focused on tools that get to the social protection for the extremely poor, like insurance products and other risk mitigation products, has been a hallmark and something that Feed the Future has always invested heavily in. So I think there's a mix of us bureaucratically, we are starting to work across the agency a bit better with places that have traditionally worked on the social safety nets, but also we need to articulate that a bit more in the Feed the Future messaging more correctly as well.
Thanks, Jada. And there was a final question in that round on technologies beyond ICTs.
Yeah. I think it was directed at Schengen, but I think the question was specifically on nutrition. One thing I wanted to add, the report mentions ICT, but there are a lot of old technologies that are really important for that as well. Basic things like cold chain storage, help with dairy and horticulture products. They shouldn't be ignored. Just regular storage facilities, biofortification, which IFPRI is been a leading player. And I think the other side of that, it's not just the technology, but really increasing the demand for nutritious foods and the behavior changes and some underlying demand for just basic fortified products and other things.
Well, I didn't mention about the various technologies. There's a book published outside available, just released about 2 weeks ago, co-authored by Margaret Grant, Claudia Ringler, and many others. So you will find in that book, the book analyzed various technology options and how these different technologies would affect efficient use of water, land, and also in terms of feeding the world. So look at that book. I remember they analyzed 11 different technologies.
Okay, so we'll go to the next round of questions. Okay, one here, one in the back over here, and another one on this side. So we'll go 1, 2, 3.
Hi, Tim Lavelle, USAID, and this is for Schengen. You know, invariably, as we look through these documents that refer to nutrition, there's very little said about fisheries, either domestic or oceanic. There's very little said about aquaculture. We all know that fish, particularly in Asia, is one of the staples of the daily diet. So, insofar as this sector, in terms of overfishing, in terms of environmental degradation, is under a threat, both domestically as well as internationally, I mean, what are your thoughts in focusing perhaps in future years a chapter or two on the fishery challenge? Thanks.
Okay, there's already a publication called Fish in 2013. Right, it's already somewhere, jointly published by IFPRI and the World Bank. Here we define agriculture broadly to include agriculture, the crop production, fishery, livestock, even forestry. So linking agriculture to nutrition does not mean linking crop production to nutrition. So it includes livestock, includes fishery, or even forestry. So there is a publication somewhere. A good suggestion. Let's see whether we can include a chapter there in our report on fisheries, such an important subsector. That book actually projected that the demand for fish will increase by a big margin. To feed or to meet that demand, aquaculture, so it's not sort of ocean fishing. So how you're going to raise fish in your fish ponds will provide great solution to that.
Question at the back? That was your question. All right, Sarah.
Hi, thank you. Reed Hamill from Save the Children. This discussion has focused on productivity and on distribution issues, whether market integration or social protection and insurance and transfers. What feels like it's been missing for me is a bit more of an explicit focus on the demand side and and family planning, access to voluntary family planning services. And so I guess particularly for Jada, but for anyone who'd like to respond, don't we see a really core role for family planning to improve food security? And in particular, one of the best ways to empower women is to reduce the opportunity cost of their time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We'll take one more question. Simone, you said there's one from...
Yeah, so this one says, ask, market-driven solutions to reduce food insecurity and undernutrition imply demand-driven solutions. What food policies have been implemented or could be implemented to generate greater demand for nutritious foods, so we're not just talking only of maize, rice, and or wheat? And this comes from Victor with the Spring Project.
Okay, so Jada, do you want to start it off with the family planning?
Yeah, so health and agriculture they're linked. They're greatly linked, and so improving access to quality health care, which will include choices and access to family planning, is important for all families, especially the extreme poor. On the demand side, on the nutrition, a lot of our work has been focused on, there's the supply side, but also the demand side, and increasing behavior change activities, increasing demand for products like orange flesh sweet potatoes, like teaching people about its effects, but innovative recipes for how to use them, and all those things to build demand. I mean, I think, as we know, even in our own lives and our own economy, behavior change is quite hard. And so all the technologies in the world, unless you have that demand, and unless you create them with that demand in mind by asking women what they want and determining what characteristics in an orange flesh sweet potato will make them use them. So I think by addressing women, working on the demand side, and integrating our work with our healthcare work, we have a robust mother-child health programming. It's a key to success.
Did any of the other panelists would like to? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Asma. Thanks.
Just on that question, I think part of it is raising awareness, and I think there's a lot of awareness to be raised. I think with the findings of the most recent Lancet, the focus on adolescent girls and the importance of their nutrition, I think there's a lot of scope to create that demand by raising awareness, and that we're sort of right at the beginning of that, and there's a lot of opportunity, I think, there, and creating products also that appeal to those groups.
Yeah, I think how to increase the demand for nutritious food. Firstly, we needed to fix the market failure. But right now, the market does not work for nutrition. Well, obviously, behavior is very important. Part of the reason is lots of subsidies go to stable crops, rice, wheat, maize. For vegetables and fruits, there are still lots of taxes, restrictions. So we needed to remove some of the market distortions and to make sure the market works for nutrition, so that if consumers are willing to pay for nutritious products, and make sure that all the distortions are removed. And as I said in my presentation, the prices of fruit and vegetables are rising. Why? Because the lack of, if you subsidize rice and wheat, maybe even maize, the farmers obviously they respond to price mechanisms. And that affects the nutrition of poor and hungry people. They just cannot afford nutritious food, vegetables and fruits in particular.
One of the things that happens when you set a target to be end or a zero target rather than halve or some other number is that you have to start to think about differentiated strategies for differentiated groups and types of people. And I think that the emphasis in the new Sustainable Development Goals on ending a range of let me just call them basic needs, is precisely to say that we have to get much more disaggregated and therefore look much more systematically at, it could be demand side issues, it could be targeted to specific groups, it could be a whole range of things, but it has to be a differentiated approach. And then I also wanted to say that, again, one of the criticisms of the MDGs is that they were always treated slightly in terms of silos. They were treated slightly separately. They weren't really thought of as being a package. And I think in the new round of Sustainable Development Goals, this idea that all of them go together is actually quite important. And from that perspective, the issue of sexual and reproductive health and rights, which certainly in the high-level panel report is highlighted, is just one of the elements that links many of these things, including ending extreme poverty, including ending hunger, etc.
Yeah, I think Homi raised the question, why 2020, why 2025, not 2030? The reason was we developed this sort of time frame even before the high-level panel proposed 2030. When I was in Spain last April, there was a high-level panel on food and nutrition security, led by UN agencies, WFP, FAO, IFPRI, and Ban Ki-moon went there as well. Then I challenged the debate. I said, we need an ambitious, precise, but meantime realistic target. A year, not in our time, not lifetime, not in our generation, precise year. Whether 2025, 2030, I think that needs to be debated, right? But then David Nabarro, who is the UN representative on food nutrition security, said, hey, can you come up with a concrete year? So when we look at some of the experiences in China, India, in Brazil, Vietnam, well, you could do it. We could do it if we all work together. I said we could. And also, zero hunger. Zero hunger is impossible. You have to define what it means zero hunger. So we basically mean almost elimination of hunger. If the 7% residual hunger, like what Europe, US have right now, the US and I'm talking about developing countries, more developing countries. I do not disagree that we should also be universal, the developed and probably high-income countries. So if it's 7%, we can say, well, it's almost elimination. Then the UN...
Sorry, Schengen, 7 is not 0.
Well, anyway.
Something small, right. You're right, but 7 is too high to be anyway. 0.
So the UN Secretary General uses zero hunger, right? Zero hunger and zero food waste, zero that. I said was 0. Well, you can debate with him what it means 0. So I think the UN also had ambition to reduce stunting by 40% by 2020. By 2020, yeah? Not 2025, I remember. Well, maybe the change is 2025. Right. So, and when I looked at the document, some of the data they used are already very dated, because the stunting data is not every year. And many countries have actually already accelerated some of the progress. And I believe the progress will be further accelerated. Why? Sun movement, the G8 movement on nutrition, our work, the CGI research to link agriculture to health and nutrition, we created a movement that we have never seen before. I think if we continue this movement, continue to commit ourselves, I think we can accelerate our progress.
So I think we have time for one, possibly 2 questions. Simone, did you say you had a question? I'll take that one first.
There's one question that came in from Douglas Brown from World Vision International, And he refers to the infographic that's on page 78 and 79, and he says, if I understand it correctly, if efforts to scale up the core package of nutrition-specific interventions manage to achieve 90% coverage, we would only succeed in averting 20% of the stunting in the countries in question. That means that 80% of the stunting would remain. In other words, to deal with the other part, we need to deal with the ability of parents to provide for their children, i.e. poverty reduction and more productive, sustainable, and resilient livelihoods. Would this be correct?
Not the best person to answer. Do we have Harold? You worked on that, or who else? Is it Marie here? Marie's not here. Right. Harold, do you have any reflection on that? That's
that infographic comes from the recent Lancet series, and it was based on 10 interventions that are proven to be very effective globally. But they are not necessarily the ones that get to some of the core determinants. So the question is correct that in addition to those programs, which by the way, they'll reduce mortality, child mortality by 45%. So let's realize that there's more than stunting at stake here. The other interventions would include what's called, as one of the speakers already mentioned, nutrition-sensitive interventions, including social protection, including education, and including agriculture.
That's right.
Okay.
To that?
Go right ahead, please, Asma.
I think that's a really important observation. Stunting is not, it's a complicated issue, and stunting is an indicator of underlying inequality and deep-seated inequality. And I think women are key to that. I mean, part of the recent Lancet series finding that stunting sets in very early in pregnancy suggests that nutrition for women and girls is really important prior to pregnancy. And so as you unpack that, social norms and extreme poverty become really a critical part of the equation.
We'll take one last question far back. Tolu?
My name is Tolu from IFPRI, and my question actually is for Homi. If I were to ask you for one number that you think we could aspire for to consider that we've ended hunger, what would that number be? Besides 0.
Go right ahead.
Must have thought about it.
I think 0 is a very good number. It's it's nice and round in many ways. It's very clear and easy to understand. So I do think that it's appropriate to set targets based at 0. I do understand that you are likely to have residual individuals. So that 0, it's not like eradicating smallpox, where literally there are no individual cases. I would say a number that is well below 5%, maybe 3%. Jim Kim has suggested that 3% might be appropriate for ending extreme poverty. But I actually think that what's more important is the perceptions in every individual country. These are essentially societal norms, and if that society thinks that 3% is the end of hunger in their country, I think that would be appropriate, but I could equally applaud other countries that might say 3% is still too high and we want to push this down to below 1%. So I don't think one should have any absolute definition, but I do think that one should be ambitious. And as I said, I think the really critical element here is to move away from some notion of averages, which permits you in some sense to do business as usual and to try to tackle the easiest interventions, to a notion of literally reaching everyone. What in the high-level panel we tried to coin this phrase, leave no one behind, which does require you to think very hard about very differentiated strategies. And so if one can push the discussion towards differentiation and about what are the appropriate groupings to be able to make policy, then I think that there's a good chance of getting to something which is close to zero.
Thanks very much to all of our speakers and to everyone attending today. And as a reminder, the Global Food Policy Report is available online in full, in parts. All related materials are also on the main GFPR page, including a video, so feel free to access those items online and also to see the event page for the videotape of this event and any podcasts. Thank you very much for attending.